Welcome to CoolCouve. My name is David Benedictus.
Hello, I am Daria Ruggles. Hello there, David. So today is actually the third in a show that David and I wanted to do called Beyond Binary. The first show was this amazing woman who had been raised as evangelical Christian, homeschooled, and believed that gay and homosexual was wrong, but she had her heart changed when her own child came out to her, and then her mind changed when she started to get science-based facts. And then our second interview was with somebody named Mads, who's going through the transition and who was kind enough to talk about their story with us. And right, David, this made both of us curious about, what is the history of gender, and when and how did it become unacceptable, and why? Who benefits?
Well, it's in the research I did, it's actually pretty fascinating. All the cross-cultural permutations and variations in indigenous communities of having other sexual identities. It's very fascinating. I'll give that I'll get into that in some slides. I'll show you some slides in a minute because it's great to see the imagery. But I just want to pull on a thread from the first two episodes that we did. And one was this idea that that was in psychiatry up until 1972, that in the DSM-2 Diagnostic Manual of Pathological Disorders, was that homosexuality and any LGBTQ plus type of lifestyle was a perversion. And then in 1972, that was removed and it became a normal variation. And there's often a conflation between LGBTQ plus lifestyle and it being a perversion or it being something that is predatory. And the predatory behavior is still pathological. If there's a power dynamic, if rape is involved, or age differences with a young person not able to make their own decisions. And there's laws around all that, but it doesn't have anything to do with LGBTQ+. I just wanted to make that distinction there. And it reminded me of my experience as when I got drafted and I enlisted in the Navy. I was off the bus. We were all sitting on the floor. They were telling us what was going to happen that day. And they said, well, you'll go do this and get that. And you're going to go here and get a haircut. And the last thing they said was, but one thing before you leave here is that anybody who is gay needs to stand up now. Otherwise, if we find out later, you'll get a dishonorable discharge. And so that was pretty compelling. Now, this was 1968. So this was 4 years before the DSM-2 changed. So it was looked at as a perversion. Fast forward a year and a half later, I was stationed at Oakland Naval Hospital, Department of Psychiatry, as a psychiatric corpsman. And living off base with my wife. We got married in 1970 and moved into an apartment with a bunch of other people who worked up at Oakland Naval Hospital. Oakland, as you might remember or know, is between Berkeley and San Francisco. So there's a lot of culture there, long history of culture. And it was a very open communities. So I was kind of surprised after hearing that in boot camp to realize that many of the people I worked with were gay, and they were living in an apartment building near me or in our next door actually. And then as we got to know them, and we lived in Berkeley and San Francisco, we would then go to the gay bars, to the drag queen shows and stuff like that, and it was a hoot. It was a lot of fun. So there was that dichotomy there. And then actually in 1971, we had a big Halloween party offered by that was sponsored by one of the nurses in her home. She was renting a home, and a couple of guys came and dragged that.
Okay, were they the gay guys or the straight guys?
They were the gay guys that came and dragged, and they were hit on by the head of the base, who just came in because she was an officer. He came into the party just briefly, and he started chatting with them, not realizing that they were. I don't think that.
Oh, that's great. I have to ask you one other thing, David. Did it, because when you said they had to stand up, did anybody stand up?
No, no one stood up. No, but I thought about it as a way to get out of going because although.
And then your wife comes to get you.
Yeah, right. Well, we just started dating actually. I just met her a couple months before I went in the Navy, but I thought, well, this is a way to get out. But then then you have to prove it and all that. So, but I thought that was really just a stunning statement, and in fact, up until Don't Ask, Don't Tell was done away with, people were discharged with less than an honorable discharge if they were discovered that they were gay in the service. So, if even under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, I think that was 2015 when they did away with that. If you were exposed as being in a gay relationship, or they found out, if someone told, then you would get a general discharge, which has huge impacts on your ability to use your military career to get a job or get VA benefits and things like that. That's all gone now, but there's still issues with people coming out in the military, and they're still targeted, and they have issues with advancement and things like that. So I just wanted to touch on those two issues, and then I wanted to go into the slides now. So let me see if I can share these with you.
Okay.
It's
wonderful,
fascinating conversation about all of this. My mind was blown. So here we go. Hey. We can see it. So
it's a global thing, huh?
Global thing, right? It's all everywhere in almost every indigenous community on every continent. There were third, fourth, fifth, sixth sex social relationships within the community that were blessed, that were honored, and the people were fully integrated. And when the Western explorers from Western Europe went to these indigenous communities and encountered them, they were quite puzzled by this and didn't understand it, because they were seeing those communities through the lens of their Western Christian ethics. So we'll get into that problem in a few minutes here. But here's from a log of an explorer, James Brooke. He's an English explorer, and in 1848 he wrote, "The strangest custom I have observed is that some men dress like women and some women like men, not occasionally but all their lives, devoting themselves to the occupations and pursuits of their adopted sex. In the case of the males, it seems that the parents of a boy, upon perceiving him to have certain effeminacies of habit and appearance, and induced thereby to present him to one of the elders by whom he was received, these youths often acquired much influence over their masters, and they were actually, as we'll see in future slides, part of the ritual and even shamanic communities. So that was, and this you can see these kind of log entries for Portuguese, the Spanish explorers, all of them, whether they went to Africa or India, Southeast Asia, the Hawaiian Islands. So going in the Wayback Machine here, back to Rome, this is a sculpture that was unearthed in, I think, about 16 or 1700 in Italy. from about 155 BCE. And this was a copy of an earlier bronze. The mattress they're laying on is actually added later by an Italian sculptor. But you can see that the figure repose has both male and female genitalia, female breast and male genitalia. So there was a lot of interest in this, and usually it was incorporated the mythology of Venus and Dionysus and Bacchus, incorporating both male and female together.
David, isn't it actually a fact, and they call it intersex now, that is it like 2% of babies born or something like that?
It's about 1%, I think, 1%? Something like that, 1 to 2% of intersex, right? So that's one of the other genders in indigenous cultures was the intersex as well. What we now call hermaphrodite. And what the Western colonialists often confused people with who were in a third sex or other position. They often thought that they were hermaphrodites initially. From our own indigenous Native American non-binary role, there were men that had full female roles and did all of the female actions and dressed throughout their life in the female garb, and were weavers and caregivers and cooks, and took care of the community. I was remembering when I saw this, the Dances with Wolves Kevin Costner movie, they had a figure like that in that movie as well. What I didn't realize was that there were also females in the Native American culture who fully assumed the male role and were actually warriors and went out with the warriors and fought with the warriors, and were fully embraced as males and dressed as males, although they were physiologically women. In one of the tribes, there was one woman that was such a profound warrior that she was afforded special status as a chief, and she had I think 3 or 4 female wives. This is in southern Mexico, in Oaxaca. I believe that's how you pronounce it, Oaxaca, southern Mexico. And that word M-U-X-E is pronounced mushi. It comes from mujer, a Spanish derivation. And these are people that had male characteristics at birth, who dress and behave in ways otherwise associated with women, and they were seen as the third gender. And this community still exists, and this is a current photograph. Still exists. They're very important in the culture in terms of rituals, singing, and in parades, and are often it's very interesting that a lot of these relationships, they may have relationships, same-sex relationships, but it's not viewed as homosexual. It's just viewed as an expression of that third sex. So, as you can see here, there's a whole different way that indigenous approaches to sexuality and non-binary sexuality clash with the Western mindset and psychology. They didn't fit into the confined Western registry of gender binaries, heterosexuality, and as many people know from their history, is that when the Western missionaries came into those cultures, they saw that as perversion, drawing on the scripture that they had from Leviticus and other tracts, that homosexuality was an abomination and was against God. So they totally rewrote the laws in those cultures to make that punishable by imprisonment and sometimes death.
And I can't help but feel, you know, the hypocrisy and the exploitation aspect of that. Then they went about enslaving people and then using that authority by which they're saying the way that you're doing that harms no one is an abomination. And oh, by the way, we're going to enslave you. And we're going to use this book to say it's okay.
Yeah. And in all those cultures also, they wiped out the language, often wiped out the language and forced them to speak whatever the language was of the invading missionaries, Spanish or English or whatever. So, and that's well documented in Native American culture for sure. There's all these stories about sending the kids to the Western schools, and they weren't allowed to speak their language anymore. Yeah. Have any more of the ritual practices because they were pagan and not Christian. So this is Southeast Asia, Indonesia. These are the Buddhist people. I probably didn't pronounce that right. They're androgynous, and they're priests and shamans and sorcerers. You could become a man or a woman, and they were thought that because they carried both sexes, they could communicate between the two worlds, between the other world, the gods, the world of the gods and goddesses, and the human world. So they were the intermediaries in their ritual and their mythology, and were very respected. And they still exist there in Indonesia and in some of the smaller villages. They're fully accepted. There's one TED Talks I saw where this fellow was talking about that it was this man was fully accepted. He was a hairdresser. Everybody greeted him going down the street. He lived in a family. They had children, and it was just a natural experience. Now, these are in smaller communities.
It's a much lovelier, more direct definition of intersex, you know, like interpersonal. It's like, you know. So David, do you know about how long this has been going on? Is this like hundreds of years or thousands of years?
Hundreds of years. You can, because there were few written texts, what they have to do is do carbon dating on drawings and things like that. So it goes back thousands of years.
Oh.
Thousands of years. You're talking about BCE.
Wow. Wow.
Common area.
Okay.
So that's Southeast Asia, and here's India. This group has been in India for pre-colonial times, going back, and this is part of the Hindu culture, his Hiraz, and they're respected for being extremely loyal, well-trusted, and given important religious and governmental roles in the community. Again, because of their special place of being able to carry both the masculine and the feminine psychology, the masculine and feminine energies. So just looking briefly at all these, and I just wanted to mention in one of the last slides I'm going to bring up, I'm going to show you an interactive map that I found on the internet that has all the cultures around the world in Africa and India and South America, China, Italy, and you can see all of these cultural representations, all these historic traditional cultural representations by clicking on the interactive map. It's really wonderful. In fact, I guess we'll do it right now.
Okay.
So I'm going to stop share of this, and you'll see us again, and then I'm going to share the screen, and we'll go to just a second here.
It's pretty cool to see that it's ancient and so widespread.
Yeah.
And so accepted.
Oh, excuse me a minute here, though. This is Zoom. There we go. Okay. A map of, you can see this? Stop.
Yep.
Map of gender diverse cultures. Scroll down here. And you look at at this map and you click on, give me something to click on. I'll show you.
Hawaii.
Hawaii. There it is.
Okay.
Long before Cook's arrival in Hawaii, a multiple gender tradition existed among the Kanaka Moli. I'm mangling that pronunciation. Indigenous society. The maho could be biological males, all females, and having a gender role somewhere between and encompassing both the masculine and feminine. Their social role was sacred as educators. So you go, I won't get into any more of this because on Zoom it kind of messes up, but that is an example of what's out there, and we'll include that in the end of the program so people can go back to that. So that was just so wonderful to see that somehow we figured all this out in our small communities, our small pre-industrial tribal communities, indigenous communities, and we had a solution for that. And it was just, that's the way people are, and they figured out a way to fit in, and they became part of the community, fully integrated, and in fact, they're seen as blessings to the community.
Oh.
That was just so. After talking with the experience of Jessica and Mads, and the struggles that they have in terms of finding community and feeling safe in community, to see that this is possible to do again as we begin to look at the science and look back at the rich cultural history, that we can pull on these traditions and bring them forward and recreate our communities to be fully inclusive, using these as models. I just brought tears to my eyes looking at that. It was just wonderful.
It is wonderful, and I totally agree. And it's interesting because you don't realize what a straitjacket it is for everyone. I mean, to feel different. And when we were talking about telling stories, and that's a way to connect to people. And a friend of mine said, that the way that she does it is she asks people, how would you feel if you truly felt like you were trapped in the body that was the opposite of what people assigned to you? And go ahead.
It would be horrific.
Yes.
It would be. It would be so dysphoric. So I guess the word is traumatizing. I was thinking about, as Mads and Jessica were talking about, I was thinking about my background in mental health and working as in trauma, helping people recover from trauma. And one of the first things you need in recovering from the trauma of being exiled and being seen as other, and then also being targeted and not feeling safe. I mean, so for example, when I worked in mental health in the juvenile court system, that I would get a lot of calls. I was the victim impact coordinator. I'd get a lot of calls from parents whose kids were being bullied in schools, and the school wasn't being able to address the issues. And a lot of those kids were kids that were vulnerable in this way.
Yeah.
And it broke my heart because we couldn't get the schools to address that. And it's still an issue. And then when you look at that, when people do finally have the courage to come out and be authentically who they are and own their bodies and their psychology, that people turn their backs on them, and target them, and then also give them the feeling like they're not human and they're going to hell.
Right.
Now, I know a lot of my neighbors think I'm going to hell, and because I'm doing programs like this, but I don't talk about it too much. And I just let them say, yeah, okay. But can we work on this project in the neighborhood? So
very good. Yeah. Let's focus on what we can do together.
Right. Let's get into the school. Yeah, it's very interesting when you adopt a school and you have these multicultural schools like we have, and all this diversity, but you have people coming in the schools as volunteers with this kind of ethic and fundamentalist lens. It's something we have to be aware of as allies, that people need protection.
Absolutely. I'm hard pressed to call it an ethic. I think of it as a bigotry, especially because there's such an activity of unacceptance and othering and shaming and hatred, and it's so vociferous and so volatile in our society, particularly in our society.
It is. I think I was reading one of the resources we want to put in there is resources for military people who are LGBTQ plus, and there's a website for that. And one of the things that happened is many of the people that were discharged because they were outed can go back and have their less than honorable discharge reversed, given the Supreme Court decision. So things like that are happening. And this is one of the reasons I wanted to do this program is to with you is to create a community dialogue about this in service of healing and inclusivity, and to bring people the resources to normalize this, and to show people how they can be allies.
I love that, David. And the fact is that you came up with a greater authority in terms of ancient culture and also global. So if we're looking at the authority as being something that comes in before something that is not nearly as old, and also doesn't benefit, shall we say, a particular group of people with a certain opinion. I mean, it's right.
Well, the science, right? Natural selection, evolutionary biology, evolutionary psychology. Those are the three pillars that we now have available to us that we didn't have back then, but we figured it out until we were told that that was evil, it was perverse, and now we're bringing that ancient knowledge forward into new open minds, right? Which is part of the science. And it's such a breath of fresh air. I wanted to, this might be a good time to show you a couple videos that were kind of interesting that I pulled off the internet about this conversation. And you can see, one of the things you see in these videos is how damaging this rhetoric is. And that a well-renowned Christian ethicist who recently, 5 years ago, changed his mind. He was he was the evangelical Baptist Christian. He was a president of the vice president of the evangelical Baptist community. David Gushee is his name. He came out because he was open to dialogue, and he kept hearing from his parishioners their struggle, from the kids, their families, the struggle. And then at 38, his sister came out to him. And he loved her dearly, and that just changed everything. We'll put his book up. It's called Changing His Minds and Changing My Mind. And it came out of a bunch of podcasts that he was doing, blogs and podcasts that he was doing. And of course, you can imagine what happened in the traditional community once he did that. Now, he has 25 books out there, and in every Bible study class in the evangelical world, you had a couple of his books. So now he's coming out and saying, we need to be inclusive about this. And what he said was, we got it here, it just blew me away. This was in a movie that you recommended, by the way, that we should put a link to. It's called The Antidote. It's a documentary on Prime Video. You got to see it. It's wonderful, about inclusive communities and things that work bringing people together. Anyway, in this film, he says, the anti-LGBTQ plus rhetoric from the church is a weapon of spiritual destruction. You know, that is really calling, that's very powerful. And he's calling for dialogue, and he's being right up there. So check his stuff out. We'll put the book up there. This isn't David Gushee, but these are other pastors having a conversation about that. Let me see if I can share these here, okay? So there's that again, and we'll come back to, come on, Zoom.
This is gonna be fun. We're gonna see what we're up against, right?
Right, so we're gonna do the black pastor first.
Okay.
Is that right?
Well, or I think you were gonna, okay, sure, either one. I mean, I think.
Okay, here's Anderson Cooper first.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's Anderson Cooper showing a video about anti-gay sermon and having a response from another minister who has a different viewpoint. Get full screen here, okay.
A North Carolina pastor recently made news when he advocated, quote, cracking the wrist of your son if he displayed effeminate behavior, and also suggested that a father should give his effeminate son a, quote, good punch. When confronted about those comments, the pastor, Sean Harris is his name, said he was joking, was misunderstood. Today, another pastor is making headlines for comments he made from the pulpit last Sunday, also in North Carolina. Charles Worley is the pastor's name. That's him making the sermon. In the sermon, Pastor Worley blasted President Obama for supporting same-sex marriage, but he didn't stop there. He told his parishioners from the pulpit what he would do to, quote, get rid of everyone who isn't heterosexual in this country.
Of our president getting up and saying that it was all right for two women to marry or two men to marry. I'll tell you right now, I was disappointed bad. But I tell you right there, as sorry as you can get, the Bible's against it, God's against it, I'm against it, and if you've got any sense, you're against it. I figured a way out, a way to get rid of all the lesbians and queers, but I couldn't get it passed through Congress. Build a great, big, large fence, 50 or 100 mile long, put all the lesbians in there, fly over and drop some food. Do the same thing with the queers and the homosexuals, and have that fence electrified till they can't get out. Feed them, and you know what? In a few years they'll die out. Do you know why? They can't reproduce.
So that's pretty horrifying.
Yeah, it's almost funny. I mean, if you think of this person with his use of the English language and his barbaric, simplistic view, it's almost funny, except for he's serious, right? Or is he going to come back next week and say he was only joking?
He's not joking. He's for real, and there's a number of people out on YouTube. You can look at the. I have to have a glass of wine or something after I watch these videos. It's so upsetting. So let me show you Anderson Cooper's response, and then another pastor responding to that.
Okay.
And then we'll go on to another video. Let's see. I think it's a 224. Okay.
Good enough. It's okay.
During the sermon, you could hear members of the congregation shouting amen. Reverend Gaddy, you're a Baptist, so is Pastor Worley. Does this kind of rhetoric about imprisoning gays, electrifying fences, waiting for them to die, I mean, is there anything Christian about that?
I see nothing Christian about it and nothing American about it. In fact, Anderson, it is about as contradictory to a religion based on love and acceptance and welcome as you can imagine, and it violates everything we understand about the Constitution and its affirmation of diversity and freedom for people to live out their identity.
So that's enough of that.
Yeah.
But you see that there are faith communities that are pushing back against this literal interpretation, and one of the things that was so upsetting to me about that was how someone who was gay was seeing that, who's LGBTQ plus non-binary would experience that, and that is trauma. That's how you experience trauma. That's like the trauma of racism, the trauma of any kind of abuse. It's a demonization of the other. It's horrific. So let me here's a black pastor that has was giving a sermon. And I think this is a wonderful counter viewpoint.
And God said to me, here's the problem. You guys in the church can be so hypocritical. He said, in the African-American church, you really got to be careful. I said, what do you mean? He said, because you are guilty of condemning the Supreme Court system and preaching against something. But if you look at half of our choirs, and a great number of our artists, that we call abominations, that we call demons. We demonize and dehumanize the same people that we use, and we don't say nothing about the gay choir director because he's good for business. As long as the choir sound good, I ain't saying nothing about his sexuality. We have done what the slave master did to us: dehumanize us, degrade us, demonize us, but then use them for our advantage.
I think that was a great response to the other Georgia pastor who was demonizing and talking about internment camps. So one last resource I wanted to show here is not that one, this one. Can you see that? Welcoming resources?
Yes.
Okay, so what I was really just heartsick about Jessica losing her faith community, and I'm realizing how important that was. And a lot of her friendships, her kids' friendships, were embedded in that community, and she had to recreate all of that while dealing with the trauma and figuring out ways to protect her kid. So the resources here are wonderful. Find a welcoming congregation in Africa, Australia, and if you go to the United States, and then you click down, you can see by state. And if you go to Washington and you type in the zip code, you can find your community. You can find welcoming, inclusive communities in Washington, Oregon, wherever throughout the United States.
That's so nice.
Oh, it is so wonderful, and we'll put that link into the into
our resource. Yeah, our resource guide. You got it. Well, we'll always include a little resource at the end for everybody for all of these good things, and even the ones that are not so good that maybe you want to take a closer look at.
Right. So one last thing, and that is this last slide here. Let's see. Did I share that?
Oh, you stopped sharing.
Okay. Zoom is so fun, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, you're getting the hang of it. You did some pretty fancy stuff there, David. I don't know.
Okay. Here we go. So this last slide. Well,
it unshared.
Oh goodness gracious!
Be nice to the Zoom gods.
Can you see that? No.
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. Okay, and now we'll share again. Share screen again. Okay, now. Now, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, last slide. From current slide. There we go. So this is a wonderful movement that's happening. One of the things, again, about LGBTQ plus psychology is the acceptance and being able to be who they are. And people encounter this issue when they go into for appointments in doctor's offices, when they try to travel, and traveling out of the country is especially challenging sometimes, to have the persona that you want on your passport or on your ID. So globally, multiple countries are legally recognizing non-binary or third gender classifications and have already introduced X-gender passports.
That's great.
In 2019 in Canada, yeah, it's just, wow, how progressive, how wonderful. So in 2019, Canada introduced gender-neutral passports with an X category. In Argentina, Australia, Denmark, and the Netherlands, Germany, Malta, New Zealand, Pakistan, and India, and Nepal, they already have a third category. So I guess it's about time for us in the United States to get on that.
Get on board.
On board.
Yeah. I love this, David, too, because the whole normalizing thing as an antidote to the traumatizing thing.
Yes.
One of my favorite shows is that one that just ended that's called Schitt's Creek.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I love that show. And it won all kinds of awards, not for like trying to be preachy and saying, you know, shame on you or anything, you know, you need to do this and get with it, but instead by creating, as you probably know from watching it, just these normal, incredibly touching, beautiful relationships where they didn't focus on it being in any way strange. It was like, hey, there's male, female, and then you got this other one, X. Pick one. It's okay. Just pick another one. Maybe there's 5. Maybe there's 6. There's room for everybody. It's like the children on the playground before they get hate, before they get this message that, no, you can't do that because you're a girl or you're a boy or I don't know what you are. You're confusing me and that threatens me and makes me scared. So no, you can't play. The playground's big enough for all of us.
And it's wonderful to play with other people in that way. We have a lot of fun. I peripherally am involved with the faith community. I used to be a member of the Unitarian Universalist community here in Vancouver, and actually taught the Universalist sex education course for 1 year, which was very anatomically correct, progressive. This was back in '91, so it's a while back, but it was wonderful to have these discussions with kids, and they would say, "Do our parents know we're talking about this?" You know, so and hopefully that conversation now can come into the schools in an appropriate way now that we've passed referendum 90, and a lot of the concern about referendum 90 was the LGBTQ plus issue in the schools, and so the so did you know that in 12/7 of this year, 2020, the Supreme Court declined to take an appeal from the Dallas, Oregon parents group who want transgender students in their school district to use locker rooms and bathrooms based on their sex assigned at birth. So that was the lawsuit, right? Went to the Supreme Court, went to the appeals court. The appeals court said, well, the law seems fine, but they went up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said a policy that allows transgender students to use school bathroom and locker facilities that match their self-identified gender in the same manner that cisgender, that means physiologically, biologically gendered, students utilize facilities that does not infringe on the 14th Amendment policy or parental rights or First Amendment free exercise rights, nor does it create actionable sex harassment under Title 19. Judge A. Wallace Tashima of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals wrote. So the Supreme Court turned it back. It said, don't see anything to be an issue here. And in Washington, we're going to start having these conversations, age appropriate in schools, so people can normalize that and not be bullied and seen as other than, and can be appreciated for their uniqueness.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. Well, and it's especially vexing to me because the idea that education brings about bad choices when we have so much evidence to the contrary. Just saying no without having education in order to form the ability to have informed consent doesn't work with drugs, doesn't work with sex, doesn't work. Right? I mean, we've got enough data, we've got enough evidence on this.
Prohibition never works.
No.
That's the forbidden fruit, right? So right. Another little detail that I thought was great. And in 2020, the 2020 general election we just had, voters elected 6 transgender candidates to state office.
Wow, yay.
And there was several before that as well. So there's openly gay, Pete Buttigieg is now going to be the Secretary of Transportation, right? That's the first. So we have all this wonderful diversity coming forward, being brought forward, and
boy, do we need it.
We need it. We need all hands on deck. We need everybody helping out to figure out how we're going to move forward and have a group of diverse problem solvers working on the issues that face us and bring us together. Amen.
That's beautifully said, David.
So anything else we need to? Oh, one last thing. I encourage people to read Karl Popper's book, The Open Society and Its Enemies. One of the things he says, now this is a little bit edgy. He says, if we extend unlimited tolerance even to those who are intolerant, if we are not prepared to defend a tolerant society, in other words, be allies, against the onslaught of the intolerant, then the tolerant will be destroyed and tolerance with them. So we should claim that any movement preaching the intolerance places itself outside the law.
Okay, does that mean then we should be tolerating everything but the intolerant?
We should be in dialogue with everything, and with the intolerant realize that there's no reasoning there to engage with, and that it is a weaponized process, and that we need to protect ourselves and also the community from weaponizing intolerance. Mm-hmm. It's in psychology they call it the dominance of the minority population, or the minority position. So they take over, and the minority position in the community takes over and decides, because they have the power, which is happening, of course, in the United States. 70%, in 2015, 70% of the population of the United States were supportive of LGBTQ plus lifestyles. No ifs, ands, or buts. Gay marriage, no ifs, ands, or buts. Sex education, no ifs, ands, or buts. By 2019, that decreased to 69%, because Republicans were moving to the traditional position of demonizing and ostracizing LGBTQ plus communities. Mm-hmm. So this is the work we have to do. And here in Vancouver, we have some resources and helpful people and allies to join with in that effort.
Absolutely. And David, I think it's important too to recognize that minority doesn't mean the tyranny of the majority over less numbers. The way that you're depicting it, and from what I understand you saying, is it's a very parsed view that because it is undergirded with falseness and pushed forward as a legitimate opinion, and then it is used to lord over and weaponize people who do have tolerance. And that's the aspect of the tyranny, right?
That's exactly right. Thank you for fleshing that out. Yes.
Just so I understand.
Right, yeah. That's what I was trying to say. Right, good job. So anything else that you want to add to that?
That's it. I mean, this is our addendum to the wonderful first two shows. And we're going to continue on. We have so many fascinating, and please don't hate us. We really do want to come from a place of taking these really big issues that are scary and bringing them down to Vancouver and having open-hearted, open-minded, fact-based discussions on them. And, we welcome all people, and we are completely tolerant of everything except intolerance that is based on irrational hatred and used to weaponize and wield power over people who are vulnerable. So please come back.
Yes. And just to put a pin in it, we may do a future show on and really look closely at the religious bigotry going on in the United States. I mean, we just touched on it, but we wanted this to show as a background, but we can get into that and bring in local people to talk about that in the future.
Oh boy, that's going to be fun.
Yeah, I've been wanting to do that for a while.
Me too, David. Yeah. Oh boy.
Okay.
All right, my dear. Well, thank you so much. It's a beautiful day. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. David's going to go do his walk, and I'm going to do mine, and we're going to be masked up because we're still in COVID. That's where we are today, but we have a virus. Almost a new year. So thanks for joining us on CoolCouve, and please stay tuned. We have so much more to share with you.
Stay cool and stay curious.